At least 4 people have been killed in a mine collapse in Pakistan. A methane gas explosion caused the coal mine in a remote area of the country to collapse. 9 workers remain missing as rescue workers recover the bodies of those who died. Local authorities say they will investigate the cause of the explosion.
And thanks so much for joining us for 12 News at 4. I'm Tram Mai, along with Troy Hayden, who's live in Los Angeles County, where crews are still trying to contain the massive wildfires ravaging Southern California. And the numbers are staggering. An estimated 10,000 structures have burned based on aerial surveillance, so that number is expected to grow. Another number that could likely increase: the number of people who have died. Right now, 10 are confirmed dead, but as fire officials move on from fighting to recovery and assessment, it could be more. 56 square miles have burned so far in the Eaton fire. Now, for comparison, the entire city of San Francisco is just 49 square miles. And finally, this is on track to become the costliest wildfire disaster in the nation's history, with losses estimated to top $50 billion. And we're not out of the woods just yet. We still have Santa Ana winds predicted for next week. So let's head over to Troy right now in Altadena with a look at all the devastation there. Troy?
Yeah, Altadena is the epicenter of the Eaton fire, and I'll show you the devastation here in just a moment. But what happened was the fire started up in these mountains just to the north and swept down through these neighborhoods. And you can see this home right here looked like it just did a lot of planting in the front yard. Even this little sapling of a tree, you can see it still has the little posts next to it trying to keep the tree upright. The tree didn't make it. The house didn't make it. You can see where they're going to have their garden out here in front. Only one structure on this entire block, Tram, survived. And you're looking at it right there. This little detached garage. Why? It's hard to say. There's a big tree right behind it. The house in front of it is burned. The house next to it is burned. It just shows you the randomness of these fires when they come through. That's the only structure that survived on this entire block. There is another home here in Altadena, though, that a lot of our viewers likely know, and it did survive. Take a look. And another good piece of news for Altadena, this is an interesting little street called Christmas Tree Lane, and you can probably see why. Big pine trees line both sides of the street. It goes for 3 or 4 blocks, and those trees still have their Christmas lights in them. And the good news, they are still standing. Although they do look battered and limbs are on the street, Christmas Tree Lane survived this fire. You can see smoke coming up from behind what's one of the most famous houses in Altadena. Look at the front of it here. If you're a fan of the show 90210, you'll recognize this as Brandon and Brenda's house from the show. So right now it's still standing, even though there's smoke coming up behind it. The house next to it, though, totally burned down. So for right now, the 90210 house still stands. Yeah, and the last time we checked, it was still standing as well, but how close was that, the fire actually popping up behind it? Okay, so this is how it works down here. You can see this water truck to the left. That water truck is assigned to the fire truck on the right. Those 2 vehicles and the crews that belong with them are on this street 24 hours a day. Their job is to put out any hot spots because, as you said, Tram, when those winds pick up again, could be happening over the weekend, could happen tomorrow, who knows? They're going to be here and make sure all the hot spots here are out so the embers don't blow down into parts that are not burned yet.
Yeah, those images behind you, that is just still so surreal. I noticed that wooden fence along there. It almost looked as though, I think it's on the other side of you when you were showing us that still standing, you know, casita type of thing. That wooden fence, it almost looked as though it was melted. Like the way it's kind of like dripping, like that is just so wild. I mean, how it just kind of picks and chooses
It's actually burned up from the bottom. Yeah,
it's just, you know, and I'm also noticing too.
And I don't know how this would survive. And even the, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you know, obviously it didn't look like a whole lot of people were on your street there. Is that also, you know, an area where police are not letting residents go back and see whatever's left?
Yeah, so this is a full evacuation zone. And, you know, here's a reason why people aren't being let back in as of right now. I mean, look at this power line here. This power line is draping over. Now, they have de-energized, we believe, these lines. But things like this are everywhere. We've seen big trees that are halfway blown over. And until those trees can get secured, you walk underneath them and a big tree collapses on you. I mean, there's dangers everywhere you look. We're being very careful. We're staying in the street. We're staying on the sidewalks. But yeah, the public is not being let back in here yet. And that curfew is in effect, sundown to sunup. And National Guard, we saw for the first time today, the National Guard is guarding all these entrances.
Okay, that's good. Yes, definitely be careful where you step, Troy. Stay safe. We're going to see you in our next half hour. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Now to an emergency evacuation at frigid, snowy Atlanta Hartsfield Airport. It happened this morning. Delta Airlines says 200 passengers on a flight bound for Minneapolis from Atlanta were forced to evacuate this morning due to an engine issue. Passengers exited the plane by slides and waited in freezing temperatures before ground transportation took them back to the terminal. The airport says 4 passengers reported minor injuries. 3 were treated on the scene and 1 was transported to the hospital. Our Ike Ajachi is there at the airport in Atlanta. So Ike, tell us more.
Yeah, Kira, this is a very frantic scene right here at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport earlier this morning. You said it there yourself, a Delta Airlines jet with 201 passengers, 7 crew members, was forced to evacuate earlier this morning after a reported engine issue caused that aborted takeoff shortly after 9 a.m. We know that 4 individuals were injured. One of them was taken to a local hospital, while 3 other passengers were treated for minor injuries right here at the airport. And we are being told this incident did cause further delays. However, Delta says it's unsure if the weather had anything to do with the aborted takeoff. Now, the footage obtained by ABC News shows that Delta plane stuck on the tarmac with those emergency inflatable sliders coming out of the plane. We see a lot of those passengers frantically exiting the plane, essentially trying to get away from the area as fast as they could as those emergency crews essentially convalesced around that plane. Now, in a statement, Delta wrote, quote, "Flight crew followed established procedures to suspend the takeoff after an indication of an engine issue." Again, the airport says that the aircraft aborted that takeoff at 9:10 on its way to Minneapolis. Now, according to Live ATC, ABC News was able to listen to the pilots in the plane as this incident was unfolding. We can hear the pilots talk about reporting a possible fire in the engine located on the right wing. Again, these were the pilots speaking to traffic control all as this incident was unfolding. 201 passengers were on board, 7 crew members, that's 2 pilots, 5 flight attendants. All of them were forced to evacuate, and the NTSB says they are monitoring this entire incident as it unfolds, Kira.
All right, Ike Ajachi. Thank you.
Lastly, get your thoughts on something really important today. Back home, Josh Frydenberg has said that anti-Semitism will be a focus at the upcoming election. Of course, we've seen Labor in its unofficial pre-election campaign blitz over the last week. A vote here on cohesion, Mr. Frydenberg claims here. Do you agree with that? And which party will be best suited to keep the Jewish community safe?
Entirely agree with Josh Frydenberg's comments. You can't overstate the disaster of the anti-Semitism that's so widespread in Australia across many sectors, especially the cultural sector. And we have to take a stand, and a principled one at that, and stare down the anti-Semitics. The fact is that the Jewish community have been drawn to the coalition, who've been unambiguously opposed to anti-Semitism and want to use Australian hate laws to curb it and to stamp it out. So politically, there's been a major shift overall in the Jewish community towards the coalition because they believe the Labor Party is domestically or internally conflicted between its large Muslim voting populations and its support of the principle of anti-Semitism.
I want to get your thoughts on some other news and staying in the US. It's a big time at the moment there, but Trump will be inaugurated as a convicted felon, not something we've seen before. Do you think it will have any ramifications on his presidency?
No. If it was to have any ramifications, it would have been in the vote. The Americans see it as a private indiscretion of President Trump in regard to the woman involved and his attempts of a very minor, technical, if you like, a paper cover-up. And combined with all of his other legal actions, it hasn't influenced the voters. You're either supporting President Trump or you're against him, and this incident in the past and ongoing is not going to influence you.
Interesting. Well, I mean, Donald Trump has sent shockwaves throughout the world with his territorial claims on Canada, Greenland and Panama Canal over the last week. It's hard to ignore those. Do you think we should take him seriously?
Oh, very seriously. And all of those countries involved are as well. Holly, without giving a history or geopolitical lesson, we don't have the time, but you've got to understand the geography of all these places. The Panama Canal, for instance, every American child is taught about the American ingenuity and the financial muscle that connected the Atlantic and Pacific oceans. Greenland, America's had a military presence there and base and naval facilities since the Second World War, and that's become very important with the melting of the polo caps, that there's increased shipping there. Canada, well, Canada's been a stand-up comics dream for decades and made light of by many comedians. But there's two states in Canada, Alberta and Saskatchewan, who actually have expressed interest in becoming part of America. So there's a history there. Trump's putting it all in the mix. We'll see where it falls out, but he's projecting American power, and that's what the Americans expect of him and want him to do. He is laying down the law that the Americans have vital economic and security and defence interests and won't be pushed around, and will stand up to Russia and China as a consequence.
Peter, we do have to wrap things up, but I want to lastly get your thoughts on something really important today. Back home, Josh Frydenberg has said that anti-Semitism will be a focus of the upcoming election. Of course, we've seen Labor in its unofficial pre-election campaign blitz over the last week. A vote here on cohesion, Mr Frydenberg claims here. Do you agree with that? And which party will be best suited to keep the Jewish community safe?
Entirely agree with Josh Frydenberg's comments. You can't overstate the disaster of the anti-Semitism that's so widespread in Australia across many sectors, especially the cultural sector. And we have to take a stand, and a principled one at that, and stare down the anti-Semitics. The fact is that the Jewish community have been drawn to the coalition, who've been unambiguously opposed to anti-Semitism and want to use Australian hate laws to curb it and to stamp it out. So politically, there's been a major shift overall in the Jewish community towards the coalition because they believe the Labor Party is domestically or internally conflicted between its large Muslim voting populations and its support of the principle of anti-Semitism.